Thank you all for joining us today. My name's John Nothdurft. I'm Director of Government Affairs for ISSA. I've been with the association since 2019. Help lead our great team that works on legislative and regulatory issues on behalf of the cleaning industry, on behalf of all you, our 11,000 members worldwide. So really been great to see our initiatives build and actually seeing some great successes from all those, mostly due to our great team here at ISSA, including Stacy Seiden, who's our government affairs manager, as well as Misha Ragland, who does our regulatory work. So if you ever have questions about anything, please feel free to reach out to us. We love to hear from our members about anything that's impacting you or if we can be of any help in the future. So today's webinar is going to be on the 2025 legislative and regulatory agenda for the cleaning industry. So there's kind of some big concepts that I'll talk about, and then there's a lot of kind of specific policies within those. And once again, I just kind of FYI, these are a lot of a lot of these things are fluid. ISSA, I think, prides itself on trying to be opportunistic, might not be the right word, but making sure that we can adapt and kind of find where we might have solutions, meeting sort of problems that may pop up that we may not know of right now. So with that, just a quick kind of disclaimer, right? We obviously strive to make sure this is accurate and reliable. Some of this is opinion based on kind of what we're seeing in DC and on the ground. So if you have any questions or need legal advice, this is not it. So just kind of the normal disclaimer for all of you. Before I kind of get into kind of the agenda for today, firstly, I want to say we hope that this does become interactive. So if you have any questions, you can there's a little Q&A box that you can put a question in. We'll try to get to those. If we have too many, we'll still get back to you afterwards. So if you have any questions about anything, please let that know, or even just comments what you're kind of hearing. If there's other issues that maybe you think that ISSA should be focusing on or keeping an eye open for or ear on the ground for, please reach out. We are only as successful as our members, and we really rely on your feedback and engagement to really be impactful. That kind of gets to my first bullet point, kind of ISSA and our government affairs capabilities. We are the advocacy arm. We are your voice in DC, but also at the state level. There's 50 state capitals that we work with. So there's a lot going on, right? So the first aspect of that is advocacy, and that's really where we lean on our members. We hope to help train you all, get you involved in the legislative process or the regulatory process. That could be hugely impactful when these key policymakers hear from their own constituents about your business and the cleaning industry generally. So we try to make sure that we give you the tools to be effective out there. Lobbying, I'm a registered lobbyist. We also have a DC lobbyist that we engage directly with government officials and regulatory agencies on the behalf of the industry. So that's kind of the proactive sort of all the time, making sure that we know what's going on and sharing that voice. And then also we help with compliance. So, once a law or regulation is finalized and becomes law, we try to help make sure that you all have the information that you need to know about how to comply with that. What does that look like? How's that going to change your business? So we try to make sure that we're both kind of obviously reacting to anything that's out there, being proactive, trying to lead by example, but also making sure that you guys are maintaining and staying in compliance with whatever is passed or put into law. So obviously, before kind of moving forward and looking at 2025, we don't try to do this too much, but we obviously want to kind of identify some of the successes that we've had as an industry and as an association. And there were some major ones last year. So, I bring this up not to toot our own horn, but really to talk about how our members helped us this become a reality, and to show that we are having an impact. I know sometimes we can all become kind of jaded about the process, no matter what your political leanings are. Sometimes it seems like nothing's getting done, but in reality, there's actually a lot that goes on behind the scenes. Some is preventing bad legislation or regulations, some is modifying bills, and then some is proactively passing legislation. And there actually is quite a bit that does get done. So one was the overtime rules, which ISSA was actually cited in the rulemaking for. So that was recently blocked by a federal court, which was good to see. California had proposed a 2,000 square foot janitorial workloading limit per hour. So we actually were able to work on the ground with our members, with a broad coalition of groups to get that modified to then study the issue. I'll get into a little bit more about that a little bit later. And even at the federal level, right? People talk about, there's so much gridlock in Congress, and there is, right? There is a lot of gridlock there, but we actually were able to see two big pieces of legislation at least move pretty far down the path. So one was the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the tax making um, body. They passed some incentives for training for essential workers. This was actually a big issue that we had taken on our fly-in, our DC event, and we actually were able to get more co-sponsors after that event, and that we can tie that strictly back to our straight back to our members who were advocating and encouraging their members of Congress to support that, and that's bipartisan. Also, the Wipes Act, which deals with non-flushable, flushable and non-flushable wipes, that passed the U.S. House. We unfortunately ran out of time to get it through the Senate, but once again, overwhelmingly passed the House. So another piece of bipartisan legislation that would have a huge impact on the industry, something we've really supported, and we're hoping to get that across the Senate next year. Ending period poverty, which is our effort to get mental care products and away from home bathrooms, primarily those who've underserved, like schools, prisons, those sort of things. So we actually won a Power of Associations award from the ASAE, which is the Association of Associations. And we also saw legislative wins. So Colorado, Nebraska, Pennsylvania all passed legislation to that end. And then South Carolina removed their sales tax on tampons and pads and other menstrual care products. So once again, bipartisan. That's what I strive. ISSA strives to make sure everything that we're doing is in a nonpartisan, bipartisan manner, because you're just able to get more stuff done. And then we also received the 2024 Safer Waste Partner of the Year award from EPA and a whole host of other things. And we'll get into a little bit. International Cleaning Week will be coming up in late March. And I think we had 24 governors proclaim Cleaning Week, and we'll be asking you a little bit later for your help in hopefully getting as close to all 50 states of proclaiming Cleaning Week in your state as possible. So with that, I'll plug this a couple times because it really is kind of our Super Bowl. It's a great way to kind of end International Cleaning Week. So it's the last week of March. Last year we had over 120 members hike Capitol Hill and meet with over 133 congressional offices. We also got the chance to meet with the White House on a couple different issues as well as US EPA. So it's a great event. It grows every year. Space is limited. Early bird registration ends January 15th. So if you're interested in that, it's a great event. It's a great networking event, and we have people, representing manufacturers, distributors, end users, residential cleaners. It really is. If you've never been able to do something like that, I think it's eye-opening. We have the people who have shown up and attended, even people who weren't sure why, what it was going to all be about. We have, high likelihood that you'll return because it is just a great event. It is your chance to really engage directly with your members of Congress, their staff, and the new administration. So with that, I think we do have a quick poll about kind of some of the issues that we're looking at. These are kind of vague but general, but we'd love to hear what your thoughts are. So the first one is, promoting competitiveness through tax reform, expanding workforce pathways and training to ensure the industry has workers it needs, ensuring cleaner, healthier, greener, and more inclusive spaces for people to live, work, and play, supporting a more resourced EPA and the Office of Pesticides programs. For those who may not know, that is the entity that regulates a lot of the products that are used to disinfect and sanitize. So that's a huge thing, especially for innovation when we're trying to, come up with new products to or our manufacturer come up with new products to try to, respond to emerging pathogens, things like COVID or the flu, RSV. And then lastly, kind of a catch-all, but pushing back at proposed policies that would undermine best practices in the cleaning industry and science. So feel free to select a few of these. I'll get into a little bit more about what these all mean, but we try to keep them broad because there are a lot of different solutions. I always say, when you're dealing with legislation and policymakers, rather than having one specific solution, you really kind of need a menu because you don't really know where different things are going. So we'll get into why that's the case. Part of that is political, and then part of that is just to try to say, hey, okay, what is really going to gain some interest from policymakers, and where can we build enough support for something to get it across the finish line. So with that, I think we can close the poll. So yeah, so kind of a even split across. I kind of assumed this would be case, but obviously the ensuring cleaner, healthier, greener, and more inclusive spaces for people to live, work, and play. And we'll get into some of that a little bit. Thanks for all you for sharing your thoughts on that. So I'll get into a little bit. So the first one, just kind of getting into a little bit more of the details about one of the five kind of broad issues that we see there being a lot of play for, and just giving a little bit of background. I'm sure all of you already know this already. During the election, obviously, Republicans were able to get a trifecta of government control at the federal level. So they now have the presidency, the Senate. They extended, 53-47 in the Senate, and then the House is a very, very small majority, but still a majority. So, in theory, Republicans couldn't get past what they need to get past, but there's no room for error, and they're still trying to fill a couple seats. So, it's a majority, but it's the thinnest of majorities you can get. That being said, it does offer, obviously, the majority party quite a bit of room to operate and figure out what they're going to do. And even at the state level, you have about 20 states that are fully occupied by Republicans. So that means the governorship as both as the legislature. About 16 states are operated by Democrats, and then 10 states are split control, which means either the legislature is split or the legislature is a different party from the governor. So I think you're going to see a lot of action at the state level. I would say probably more Democrat leading states, especially just trying to kind of push back at the majority party at the federal level. That's kind of a typical thing, right? You kind of have this, you try to see a lot of states that want to try to kind of push back or do what they can to kind of push back at the majority party at the federal level. So, and I'm starting with taxes because it is really probably the top issue that's going to take the most steam in DC this coming Congress. Um, the Trump tax cuts, which were passed during his first term, are going to be a major priority for the Republican majority in 2025. There's a lot of conversation over will it be one bill or two bills. Obviously the other priorities for the administration relate to immigration, the debt ceiling, tax cuts, spending reforms. But this will be probably, if not the most, one of the most lobbied on bills ever. It could end up looking like a Christmas tree. So there's a lot of room for both really good stuff, but also really bad stuff in terms of what we kind of look at. And it's going to be done through a process called budget reconciliation. So this is not necessarily something you learn about when you used to watch, how a bill becomes the law, the sort of animated sort of cartoon for those who were familiar with that. So this is a way to basically bypass the filibuster, which requires 60 votes in the Senate, but it does have some restrictions. So it basically requires you to have a spending or some sort of spending aspect to it. So there's a lot of miscellaneous stuff that I think both the majority party, the Republicans, will try to get put in that may not hold muster. So this has to be looked at by the parliamentarian of Congress, and they can throw out some stuff saying it doesn't meet the the standards, and certain things can't be put into a budget reconciliation. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but just to know it does limit what types of things can be put in. And right now, the biggest conversation is, will this be broken up into kind of a what they're calling more of an immigration border policy and maybe some defense stuff in the first package, and then we'll come back and figure out the tax cuts, or will we try to lump it into one one big bill? The House and Senate are kind of divided on this, and even Trump came out and saying he wants one bill, but then later said, "Well, if it's two bills, that's fine too." So we'll kind of see where it comes. But in terms of taxes, this is kind of what ISSA is looking at in terms of what we see as our priorities. I think everyone knows during the first Trump administration, and it's been ad nauseum, Trump talking about placing tariffs on other countries, even expanding out from just China but to other countries and even allies, ones that he even signed a trade agreement with. So Mexico and Canada, using as leverage to get some concessions on border security and other things. Obviously, these can negatively impact the cleaning industry, especially when it comes to components or raw materials that are needed. So these could be things that are manufactured in the United States, but need certain raw materials that maybe you can't find here, or components. So kind of our nuanced view on this is saying, hey, is there a way to kind of exempt out those sort of essential cleaning and safety product equipment from these sort of tariffs? We feel like, saying, hey, oppose all tariffs, I don't think that's likelihood, given Trump's kind of line in the sand on that. That being said, I think there are ways to kind of hopefully protect some of the cleaning industry and some of those essential products, especially those that are highly regulated, that may, trigger other issues by not allowing those materials from being imported, or at least having to pay an additional fee on them. Also, ensuring those personal and business tax cuts from the original tax reform do not expire. Obviously, those would raise taxes on a lot of small businesses as well as employees, and then restore the 100% bonus depreciation for capital investments. So this is a way that companies can invest in their reinvest in their business, and we want to make sure that that can be depreciated. The other three items that we're kind of looking at in terms of tax policies, I won't get too far into because they're actually covered under other issues. But once again, as I mentioned, tax reform is going to be the big issue. So ways that we can incentivize some of our other policy priorities through the tax code, I think are going to be kind of something that the industry is looking at. One of those is creating a healthy workplaces tax credit, something we worked at through COVID. We do have a coalition, a broad-based coalition that's working on that issue, to incentivize things of, how can we incentivize buildings to invest in, air filtration, cleaning practices, buying new equipment, indoor air quality monitoring, all of those sort of things, training, all those sort of things would be covered under that sort of tax credit. Also the worker opportunity tax credit, so helping incentivize and cover kind of hiring some of those displaced workers. And then kind of more of state issue is taxes on cleaning services. So we're continuing to see more states look at taxing services, not just products. So we're trying to make sure that we track those as they happen. Sometimes it's very arbitrary. Sometimes it's, window washing is taxed, but regular cleaning is not, and vice versa. So trying to maintain some sort of clarity when it comes to those sort of things. Number two, which should be of no surprise to anyone, we obviously are really trying to invest in trying to make sure that we can expand the workforce pathways and training to ensure the industry has workers its needs. So kind of big picture, always looking for opportunities to expand the workforce, career development, training, and education. So kind of getting to what are some of those specific policies that ISSA is kind of has on our menu of solutions. Workforce development, which we believe will be a huge push for the new administration. They did quite a bit during the first term. How can we create and expand opportunities in non-traditional post-secondary training? So non sort of college experience, but whether it's a certification or going to community colleges or getting a certificate, how can we formalize this sort of government recognized or even apprenticeships, which ISSA is looking at, is there an apprenticeship program that we could pull together for the cleaning industry? So a couple bills related to this. The Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act. This would expand 529 accounts to basically use those monies for training credentialing. So let's say you wanted to come to ISSA or anywhere else and get kind of a credential, whether it's CMI or SIMS, you would be able to do that tax free. I mentioned the Workers' Opportunity Tax Credit, and then the Essential Workers Economic Advancement Act. This is primarily to create a non-seasonal temporary work visa program to address labor shortages. So this would be bringing in people legally to do some of that work. That also, every one of these has bipartisan support, and something that we're trying to push. That first one, Freedom to Invest Tomorrow's Workforce Act, that's something that did, as I mentioned on one of the previous slides, pass the House Ways and Means Committee, something that we talked about at our fly-in last year, our Clean Advocacy Summit. And we actually have very cool stories about members of Congress and their staff calling our attendees and saying, I'm going to sponsor that bill after meeting with them. So we can have a different difference, and that was really cool to see. And we're hoping to move that across the finish line next year. Number three, so ensuring cleaner, healthier, greener, and more inclusive spaces for people to live, work, and play. A lot of this is education, right? During COVID, that was a great opportunity for us to talk to members of Congress, their staff, about why it's so important to understand why cleaning is important, right? It's not just a spreadsheet. It's not a race to the bottom. There's real, there's a value of clean, as we like to say at the association. And so, sometimes some of these decisions are made in a vacuum, whether it's legislative or regulatory, making decisions about whether it's products or best practices without actually understanding how the industry works, especially in the commercial cleaning space. So, broadly, we always look for policies that we can support that would promote a cleaner, healthier, greener, and more inclusive world. So what does that kind of look like? So as I mentioned, I actually co-chair the Healthy Workplaces Coalition, which is made up of about 70 groups. And so we are working to try to figure out, is there a tax credit to go out and help incentivize some of those things? We also will try to hope to support continuation of EPA's Safer Choice program, and as well as other green and sustainable cleaning procurement policies. We saw some really great advancements last year and over the last couple of years for these sort of green programs, but they are kind of on the chopping block. EPA Safer Choice, could be something that goes unfunded or less funded, which we believe would be a step back for the industry, especially one that's gotten so, we've seen so much success with that program. Support pandemic and infectious disease preparedness policies. So trying to be proactive, right? Looking forward to, if there is a new, emerging pathogen or new infection out there, how can we be prepared as a country? Not heavy-handed, but to be prepared, right? And so there is an Office of Pandemic Preparedness within the White House. There's still kind of that was created by Congress, but there has been talk about eliminating that entity. We met with them actually last year to talk about the cleaning industry and the role that cleaning and hygiene plays in that. So we are definitely going to support those sort of efforts, best practices, things like that moving forward. And lastly, our End Period Poverty campaign, which we hope to expand support for period positive bathrooms and removal of the sales tax on menstrual care products. So, like I said, bipartisan in nature, and something that has really had a huge impact and real success across the country. And we're hoping to kind of build on that and see where that goes from here. Fourth, supporting a transparent and fully resourced and streamlined EPA Office of Pesticide Program. So, for some of you who do not know, so EPA is the main regulatory body that oversees a lot of the cleaning products. For some of those products that are used in healthcare facilities and other types of things like that, they could have some jurisdiction under FDA. So think hand sanitizers and some other products, some body washes actually. But primarily EPA is the entity that we operate with. And during COVID, we were able to get some restrictions removed, giving some flexibility to the manufacturing in terms of supply chain to basically be able to mobilize more quickly and obviously increase um, amount of types of products that got to market as quickly as possible. We've kind of struggled. So there's a piece of legislation that ISSA worked with a coalition to pass in a few years ago called PRIA, or the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act. It's kind of a partnership of shared responsibility of both industry that pays fees as well as government that should be investing as well to streamline the process to get new, current, and innovative products to market. So think disinfectants and all these great products that our manufacturers are making, get them to market quicker. And unfortunately, it's been kind of a slog. There's a lot of reasons for that. I'll get into some of them. But obviously, the biggest thing is to have reliability and expectations of, if I'm a manufacturer, I have a product, I'm trying to get to market, and I do all the right things, I have all the studies in place, what does that timeline look like? And unfortunately, a lot of those timelines have not gotten have been kind of delayed, and so that restricts some of the things that our members can do, and that I know there's been a lot of frustration over that. So I think we see an opportunity to kind of relook at that entity and obviously once again giving them the resources that they need to get our products to market quicker. One quick plug, if this is an issue or area of expertise, anything really related to products, maybe even sustainability, PFAS, EPA, please reach out to Miche Ragland. She's our regulatory affairs manager. She was hired last year, 2024. So we're continuing to kind of expand our outreach and our expertise in this area. So please, I'm sure she'd love to hear from you. And that's just something that I think a great resource. So I have her her email here on the screen. Feel free to reach out, and we do have a lot of cool education coming up around that. So specifically, EPA policy priorities, and these actually all come out of a letter that ISSA signed on with a coalition called the PRIA Coalition to the incoming administration and the EPA transition team. So firstly, it's to support additional funding. Oh, sorry. So that EPA can review and approve pesticide registration actions in a more predictable way. We also are calling on, and this is already part of the law, so just trying to encourage it to happen sooner rather than later, is an independent third-party assessment to identify basically process improvements for the agency. How can we improve? Maybe there's ways to improve without spending more money. I'm sure that's going to be a big push. I'm sure many of you have heard about Doge and Elon Musk and what they're doing in terms of kind of this sort of process improvement and trying to find efficiencies. Well, we believe that obviously there are some efficiencies that can be made without spending more money. So obviously we want to look into those. I also want to give credit to EPA and OPP, the Office of Pesticide Programs. They have been trying to do some process improvements over the couple years. It's slow, government moves slow, but there are some things in process, and we're encouraging to continue to work towards that. I think we'll have some stuff to share, especially with our manufacturers, about being able to track what's being done. If you have a new product, or if you're trying to go through the process, be able to see that kind of through the process. And then obviously we want to make sure that they try to undertake substantial efforts to identify and implement impactful process and transparency improvements. I think one of the biggest things that for any entity, sometimes I think companies, and this is not EPA, this is just the government in general. You're trying to get something approved by government, it goes into this black hole. Maybe it's a business license, maybe it's a product, support, and you just don't know what's going on, right? And so you don't hear anything. You think, is anything actually happening? So I think transparency is one thing that we're hoping that not only EPA, but other agencies hopefully have a little bit better, can do a little bit better job of, so that at least, while we might be frustrated with how long it's taking, at least we can understand, okay, where is it in the process? And maybe are there things that can be done to improve that or streamline that process? And then kind of the fifth point that I wanted to bring up, and once again, if you have any questions, and we'll get into some of those, please put those in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those momentarily. So pushing back at policies that would undermine best practices or science. So, you know, ISSA is supporting policies that would strengthen worker safety um, without undermining efficiency or best practices. There's been some kind of talk around whether it's ergonomics or workload limits and different things like that. And while I think the folks and policymakers that are looking at that are saying, well, that's the best way to protect worker safety. We look at it and saying, well, that's not necessarily the best way to look at worker safety because, if you put a production rate limit on someone, but they're using a floor scrubber instead of, hand washing a floor, well, which one's going to actually be more helpful to worker safety? So I think it's very nuanced and trying to educate policymakers around, what we teach in terms of how to have a trained workforce. And it kind of gets back to one of our early points is, without a trained and educated workforce, there probably will be more injuries. It kind of is what it is. So I think that's why we as an association have invested so much time and effort, not only to creating and advancing our own trainings and certifications, but also can we get some incentives out there so that companies can afford to do that or are incentivized to train workers, frontline workers, because it really does come down to helping to protect them and worker safety. And lastly, ISSA has been doing a lot in terms of sustainability. We're one of the early proponents of green cleaning, and so we definitely want to advance sustainability efforts, but we also have to make sure that we don't undermine science or jeopardize public health. And sometimes those can be in conflict somewhat, but obviously trying to make sure that we're educating policymakers and regulators about what's actually going on, what's doable, what are timelines, right? I always say, when it comes to policies, um, you know, sometimes they can fit on a napkin and they sound great, but the devil's really in the detail. So, a good example of this is extended producer responsibility, which is the idea of um, making sure that, product containers are recycled more. I think that's a great effort, but obviously there are unique challenges when it comes to institutional and industrial cleaning products as opposed to consumer products, right? They're not the same container. They're shipped different. They're different. There's just they could be different formulas, different, um, all kinds of different aspects. So making sure that we educate those policymakers about the differences within those, I think is very important. So that's one example of it. I think EPR is going to be a huge issue. There's a handful of states that are implementing policies this year. Some of those policies exempt industrial and institutional products, and then others they kind of treat all products the same. So we're this is probably going to be kind of the first kind of full year of seeing some of these EPR programs go into fruition. So we'll kind of see where that happens. There's going to be growing pains, and we're hoping to help make sure that those do get implemented correctly. And there's probably going to be some changes. I think there's going to be regulators and legislators that have to come back and say, okay, this didn't really work how we wanted it to. So ISSA is there to kind of make sure that they can work for both um, promoting sustainability, but also for our members who produce the product or distribute the product, because sometimes the distributor can be liable as well. As I mentioned, engaging stakeholders to ensure worker safety proposals around ergonomics, work loading, et cetera, ensure solutions are based in best practices rather than 2,000 square foot metric. So we just want to make sure that if we are looking at those sort of proposals, and there's been some at the federal level, especially for warehouses, but also at the state level. California, Washington, Oregon, all have legislation or things on the bill or studies that are looking at specifically the janitorial industry and what this looks like, right? How do we prevent more injuries of the workforce? And we believe it still comes back to making sure that they use the product or the equipment correctly. Um, I think that's the biggest way, rather than saying, well, you can only, if you clean 2001 square feet per hour, all of a sudden injuries go up 80%. Well, we know that's not to be true. Every type of space is different, right? Cleaning a warehouse that's 100,000 square feet, you can do that probably more quickly than say a operating room, which obviously, that might be difficult to even get close to 2,000 square feet. So I think that's where we're trying to push back to just try to say, hey, we want to be at the table. We want to talk to you about worker safety, but what does that actually look like for all of us? And then lastly, I think this is more of a catch-all, but how do we educate regulators about the commercial cleaning industry and engage federal or state policymakers when proposed legislative or regulations are misguided or need to be amended? Um, you know, this is kind of a catch-all because there's a lot of ideas that come out there. Some of them are good, some of them have good intentions, but quite frankly, when they're being proposed by people who have never cleaned a building or have never formulated a product. So just being part of that process and being at the table when those conversations are happening so that maybe there's a better solution, right? So um I used to say, and I know myself, when we meet with policymakers, it's not about just opposing out of hand saying no, don't do that. It's more about, okay, is there something here that can be done, and what can industry do to participate in that process to maybe find a different solution to the problem that's being raised by whether it's consumer groups or workers or whoever. So we try to be more proactive and try to make sure that we're finding solutions rather than just being kind of the organization that says no, we don't want to change anything that's happening. I think that's a losing hand. But obviously, sometimes when the rubber hits the road and if a legislation is trying to push it across the finish line, sometimes you do have to take a strong no and say, "Hey, we'd love to have interactions with you about what we can do differently." So with that, I do have a couple plugs, but I wanted to just say, if you have any questions, once again, you can start putting those into the chat. Um, and then, kind of three ways you can get involved. So maybe you heard some stuff that you are interested in. We really highly advise you to sign up to become an advocate, receive our legislative and regulatory updates. We also, as I mentioned, have International Cleaning Week coming up, March 23rd through 29th. We actually will have a webinar next month on that. So, and then we are hoping to get, as I mentioned, as many governors as possible, or even, mayors and other entities to proclaim Cleaning Week in your states or cities. So if you are interested in helping us, we do need a resident of the state. Please email Stacy. She'll help walk you through the process. She'll even, submit it for you. So it really takes no more than just a quick email to Stacy. And some states we already have kind of locked down. Other states, we're still looking for kind of proponents. So it's pretty cool when you get kind of a signed proclamation from the governor, sign saying Cleaning Week in whatever state you may be. And then lastly, I would make a pitch to say, hey, if you're really interested and you really want to be more involved at the ground level, helping to inform some of the policies that ISSA is looking at, there's a whole host of different opportunities. We have a government affairs committee. We have a regulatory affairs committee. We have our state advocacy leaders, which is our newest one. And we're definitely trying to expand that out. I think we have 20 advocacy leaders. So we're trying to get 2 in every state, and other opportunities as well. But please reach out to myself, reach out to Stacy, reach out to Misha. We'd love to get you more involved in the process. And if you're not quite sure what's going on, as I mentioned, I'll sound like a broken record, but I really encourage you to sign up for our Clean Advocacy Summit. Early registration ends in about a week. We're hoping to have around 120 to 150 cleaning industry professionals. If you're kind of, hey, I don't know, I've never met with a member of Congress or their staff, or I've never been to DC, please, we train you. We'll set up all your meetings. We'll put you with a group that's done it before. you will, you are the expert. And so you can see our picture in the bottom corner. That was last year's group. That's increased exponentially over the last couple of years. It's a great experience, and I think it's just really good. And honestly, it's a good networking experience. It's a smaller group, but these are people really passionate about the cleaning industry. Thank you all for being members of ISSA, for all you do. We're really excited about 2025. Obviously, International Cleaning Week or fly-in. I think there is a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of things that are going on, and it is state by state, so it can be very difficult to track a lot of those, and we do try to. So with that, thank you so much for attending, and if you do have any questions, please reach out. And thank you so much for joining us here today on ISSA's webinar.